Mara's hand froze over the parchment when she heard boots outside the tavern door. Her heart pounded, but it was only old Garrett stumbling in for his evening ale. She let out a breath and looked down at the drawing in front of her, ink still wet, and grinned. The face staring back at her from the page was unmistakable. Sharp jaw drawn twice as wide as it should be, eyes narrowed into an exaggerated glare, a crown sitting crooked on a head she had drawn far too large. Beneath the face, in bold letters, she had written "Wanted," and under that, in smaller writing, "For crimes against good manners and reasonable taxes." It was a joke, nothing more. A silly, harmless joke about the Alpha King, a man she had never met and likely never would. Everyone in her village complained about him behind closed doors. The taxes had gone up again last spring. The border patrols had grown stricter. People whispered that he never smiled, never softened, never forgave a mistake. Mara had simply decided to put those whispers onto paper, the way she always did with things that made her laugh or made her angry. She held the poster up to the candlelight and admired her own work. The proportions were terrible on purpose. The nose was too long. The ears stuck out like jug handles. She had even given him a mole on his cheek that, as far as she knew, did not exist. "What are you drawing now?" asked Bexley, her friend since childhood, sliding onto the bench across from her with 2 mugs of cider. Mara turned the parchment around so Bexley could see it. Bexley's laughter came out so loud that 3 men near the fireplace turned to look. She slapped a hand over her mouth, eyes wide and shining with mischief. "You cannot let anyone see this," Bexley whispered, though she was still grinning. "If the wrong person sees it, you will end up in chains before sunrise." "No one is going to see it," Mara said, waving a hand. "It is just for us, a bit of fun after a long week." She had spent the day sketching portraits for coins outside the market square, the way she did most days. An old woman wanted a picture of her late husband from memory. A young boy wanted a picture of his dog. It paid enough to keep bread on her table, but it was not exciting work. The poster of the Alpha King was her private amusement, something to make Bexley laugh and nothing else. Bexley reached across the table and tapped the parchment. "You should pin it up somewhere, just to see people's faces." "Absolutely not," Mara said, though the idea made her smile. "Just here, in the tavern. Everyone already complains about him. It would make people laugh." Mara hesitated. The tavern was full of familiar faces, people who grumbled about the same king every single night. It felt harmless enough. She was not spreading lies or inciting anyone to rebellion. It was a drawing, a joke. "Fine," she said, "but only here, and only for tonight." She walked to the wooden pillar near the fireplace and pinned the poster up with a small nail she borrowed from the innkeeper. The moment she stepped back, a group of men noticed it and began to laugh. Word passed from table to table. Soon half the tavern was gathered around the pillar, pointing and chuckling at the exaggerated crown, the ridiculous nose, the crooked glare. "Did you draw this?" someone asked her. "Guilty," Mara said, taking a small bow, enjoying the attention more than she expected. The innkeeper, a broad man named Ferris, laughed so hard he had to lean on the counter. I have never seen his face made to look so foolish. And accurate too, from what the traders say. Mara felt a warm glow of pride. She loved making people laugh, loved seeing her drawings bring a moment of joy into otherwise ordinary evenings. She stayed at the tavern longer than she meant to, talking and laughing with Bexley and the others, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. By the time she walked home under a sky scattered with stars, she had already forgotten about the poster. It was just paper and ink, pinned to a wooden pillar in a small tavern in a small village. Tomorrow there would be new jokes, new drawings, new distractions. She did not know that a traveling merchant named Colton had stopped at the tavern that same night on his way east, carrying goods to sell in the next territory. She did not know that Colton had seen the poster, laughed just as hard as everyone else, and decided it was too good not to share. She did not know that he had carefully taken it down before he left in the early hours of morning, rolling it up and placing it among his goods, thinking only of the laughs it would bring in the next town. Mara woke the next day to sunlight streaming through her small window and the sound of birds outside. She stretched, feeling the ordinary comfort of another simple day ahead. She had commissions to finish, coins to earn, a life to live. The poster was nothing more than a memory of a fun evening, already fading from her mind. She spent the morning sketching a portrait for a merchant's wife, who wanted her likeness captured before a long journey. The woman sat still and proud, adjusting her shawl every few minutes, asking Mara to make her nose look thinner than it truly was. Mara smiled and complied, knowing that flattery was often part of the trade. By afternoon, she wandered through the market square, exchanging greetings with familiar faces. The baker waved at her from his stall. Children ran past, chasing a stray dog. Everything felt exactly as it always did, steady and unremarkable in the best possible way. She had no reason to think about the poster again. It was a joke shared among friends, contained within the walls of a small village tavern. There was no way it could travel beyond those walls, no way it could reach ears that mattered, no way it could find its way toward the very man it mocked. But 3 days later, in a town 2 days' ride away, a group of shifters gathered around a market stall where Colton had set up his goods. Someone noticed a rolled parchment tucked between bolts of cloth and asked what it was. Colton, always eager to entertain a crowd and sell more goods in the process, unrolled it with a flourish. The laughter that followed was even louder than what had happened in Mara's tavern. Word spread through the town by evening. By the next morning, someone had made a copy of the drawing, and that copy found its way onto a cart heading toward the capital. Mara knew nothing of this. She continued her days exactly as before, sketching portraits, laughing with Bexley, living the quiet life she had always known. She did not think about the Alpha King often, except when taxes were mentioned, or when travelers spoke of the strict rules enforced along the borders. To her, he was a distant figure, someone who existed in stories and complaints, not someone who could ever cross paths with a village artist like herself. She had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. Cale Thorne, the Alpha King, was known for his cold demeanor and unwavering discipline. Some said he had not smiled since he took the throne. Others said he trusted no one, that he kept himself surrounded by loyal enforcers and revealed nothing of his true thoughts to anyone. He was powerful, feared, and utterly untouchable. Mara found the whole idea of him almost comical, which was exactly why she had drawn the poster in the first place. A king so serious, so guarded, so impossible to read, seemed like the perfect target for a bit of harmless mockery. She never imagined her joke reaching anyone beyond her small circle of friends. That evening, she sat outside her home, watching the sun sink behind the hills, feeling content with her simple life. She had food, friends, and a craft she loved. She did not need excitement or attention from powerful figures. She was happy exactly as she was. Little did she know, in a grand hall many miles away, a copy of her drawing had already reached the hands of someone important, someone who served directly under the Alpha King himself. And that person, upon seeing the ridiculous poster, would not be laughing quietly to himself. He would be walking straight toward the throne room, parchment in hand, ready to show his king something that would change everything. Mara went to bed that night thinking about tomorrow's commissions, about a new client who wanted a landscape painted for his wife's birthday. She thought about colors and shading, about composition and light. She thought about ordinary things, comfortable things, things that belonged to her small and peaceful world. She had no idea that her world was about to change completely, that the joke she had shared for a few laughs among friends was about to travel further than she could ever have imagined, carried by strangers who found it too funny to keep to themselves. She had no idea that somewhere far away, a king was about to see his own mocking image staring back at him, and that his reaction would set into motion events far beyond anything she could have predicted. For now, she slept peacefully, unaware that her simple prank had already begun its journey toward the one person she never expected it to reach. The parchment passed through more hands than Colton could have ever predicted. From the market town, it traveled with a group of hunters heading north. From the hunters, it reached a courier who carried messages between territories for coin. From the courier, it found its way into the hands of a young enforcer named Riven, who served under the Alpha King's personal guard. Riven had been sitting in a tavern of his own, far from his usual duties, enjoying a rare evening off. When one of the local men unrolled the parchment and held it up for the room to see, Riven nearly choked on his drink. He recognized the face immediately, despite the exaggerated features. There was no mistaking that jaw, that posture, even drawn in mockery. He sat frozen for a long moment, while the tavern erupted into laughter around him. Some part of him wanted to laugh too. It was, admittedly, a clever drawing. Whoever had made it possessed real skill, capturing something true about the king's expression, even while twisting it into something ridiculous. But another part of him understood the danger of such a thing spreading unchecked. Riven approached the man who owned the parchment and asked where he had gotten it. The man, a little unsteady and eager to share his exciting find, explained that it had passed through several hands already, originating somewhere in a small village tavern many days south. "I need to keep this," Riven said, offering the man a handful of coins in exchange. The man happily agreed, more interested in the coins than the parchment itself. Riven rolled it up carefully and tucked it inside his coat, his mind already racing. He knew he had two choices. He could destroy it quietly and pretend he had never seen it, hoping the joke would fade away on its own. Or he could bring it to the one person who needed to know about it. He chose the second option, not out of malice, but out of duty and a strange curiosity about how his king would react. The journey back to the capital took 2 full days. Riven rode hard, stopping only when necessary, the rolled parchment secured safely against his chest the entire time. He rehearsed what he would say, how he would explain finding such a thing, how he would present it without seeming as though he found any part of it amusing. When he finally arrived at the palace, he requested an audience through the proper channels, waiting anxiously in the corridor outside the throne room. Guards eyed him curiously, wondering what business could be urgent enough for him to travel so quickly from his assignment. Cale Thorne sat upon his throne when Riven was finally allowed inside. The Alpha King's expression was, as always, unreadable, a mask of calm authority that gave nothing away. His dark eyes tracked Riven's approach with quiet attention, waiting for whatever news had brought him back so urgently. "Speak," Cale said, his voice steady and low. Riven bowed deeply before straightening, the parchment held carefully in both hands. "Your Majesty, I found something during my time away that I believed you should see, though I confess, I am uncertain how you will receive it." Cale's brow lifted slightly, the only sign of his curiosity. "Show me." Riven stepped forward and unrolled the parchment, holding it up for his king to see. The throne room fell into complete silence. Advisors standing nearby leaned forward, curious, despite themselves. For a long moment, nothing happened. Cale simply stared at the drawing, his expression unreadable, his eyes moving slowly across every exaggerated detail. The nose stretched too long, the ears sticking out, the crown sitting crooked atop a head drawn far too large. The words "wanted" written boldly above a list of ridiculous complaints. Riven held his breath, uncertain whether he was about to witness anger or something else entirely. He had seen the Alpha King displeased before, had witnessed the cold precision with which he handled threats to his rule. He braced himself for that same reaction now. Instead, something unexpected happened. The corner of Cale's mouth twitched, just slightly, just for a moment, and then, to the shock of everyone present, a low chuckle escaped him, quiet at first, then growing into something closer to genuine laughter. The advisors exchanged startled glances, unsure how to react to a sound they had rarely, if ever, heard from their king. Riven himself stood frozen, parchment still held aloft, watching his ruler laugh at a drawing meant to mock him. "Whoever made this," Cale said, still smiling faintly, "has a rather accurate eye for exaggeration." "Your Majesty finds this amusing?" one of the advisors asked carefully. "I find it refreshing," Cale replied, taking the parchment from Riven's hands and studying it more closely. "Everyone around me speaks with careful words and hidden intentions. This," he gestured at the ridiculous drawing, "holds nothing back. It says exactly what it means, however foolishly." He traced a finger along the crooked crown, the exaggerated glare, and something shifted in his expression, a flicker of genuine interest replacing the usual guarded calm. For years, he had ruled surrounded by people who feared him too much to be honest, who softened every word and hid every true opinion behind practiced diplomacy. This drawing, absurd as it was, felt like the first honest thing he had encountered in a long time. "Where did you find this?" he asked Riven. "It passed through several hands before reaching me, Your Majesty. The trail leads back to a village several days south, near the eastern border." Cale studied the parchment a moment longer before rolling it carefully and setting it aside on the arm of his throne. "Find out who drew this." The advisors shifted uncomfortably. "Your Majesty, if I may ask, what will be done once the artist is found?" Kale's dark eyes lifted, something unreadable flickering behind them. I simply wish to meet the person bold enough, or foolish enough, to draw such a thing. Nothing more. Riven bowed again, understanding the unspoken command clearly. I will begin the search immediately, Your Majesty. As Riven left the throne room, whispers began to spread among those who had witnessed the strange scene. The Alpha King, known for his coldness and his unwavering discipline, had laughed. He had laughed at a drawing meant to mock him, and now he wished to find the person responsible, not to punish them, but simply to meet them. No one in the palace could quite understand what this meant. Some believed it a sign of weakness, a crack in the armor of a ruler who had always seemed untouchable. Others whispered that perhaps their king was simply human after all, capable of finding humor in unexpected places, capable of curiosity that went beyond politics and power. Kale himself remained on his throne long after the room had emptied, the rolled parchment still resting beside him. He found his thoughts returning to it throughout the day, wondering about the person who had created it. Someone with real artistic skill, someone bold enough to mock a king without fear of consequence. Someone who clearly saw him not as an untouchable ruler, but as a man whose features and expressions could be twisted into something laughable. He had spent years surrounded by careful words and calculated flattery. Every person who approached him did so with caution, weighing their words, softening their opinions, hiding behind formality. This drawing held none of that caution. It was bold, unfiltered, and strangely honest in its mockery. He found himself wanting to know more about the person behind it, not out of anger, but out of genuine curiosity about someone who saw him so differently than everyone else in his life. Meanwhile, far south in her small village, Mara remained completely unaware that her joke had reached the very throne room of the man she had mocked. She spent her days as she always did, sketching portraits, laughing with friends, living her simple and peaceful life. She had no idea that enforcers were already being sent to search for the artist behind a certain drawing, following a trail that led directly toward her small village. She had no idea that within days, her quiet life would be interrupted in a way she could never have anticipated. For now, she remained unaware, going about her ordinary routine while, many miles away, the wheels of an unexpected search had already begun turning. Riven organized a small group of trusted enforcers before the day's end, each given instructions to trace the parchment's origins carefully and quietly. They were to find the artist, learn their identity, and report back before taking any further action. Kale had been clear that no harm should come to whoever they found. He wanted answers, not punishment. As the enforcers set out toward the southern territories, Kale remained in his private chambers that evening, staring at the parchment once more under candlelight. He studied every exaggerated feature, every bold stroke of ink, and found himself smiling again despite everything. Whoever this artist was, they had unknowingly captured his attention in a way no one else had managed in years. And now, for the first time in a long while, Kale found himself looking forward to something beyond the endless responsibilities of his throne. He was looking forward to meeting the person who had dared to see him so clearly, so honestly, so unafraid. Mara's village had never seen so many strangers arrive at once. It began with a single rider passing through the market square, asking quiet questions of the merchants about a drawing that had supposedly originated somewhere nearby. By the following afternoon, 3 more riders had arrived, each wearing the same dark uniform, each carrying themselves with the disciplined bearing of trained enforcers. Bexley was the first to notice them, rushing to find Mara at her usual spot, near the market square, where she sketched portraits for passing travelers. "There are strangers asking questions," Bexley whispered urgently, pulling Mara aside behind a stall. "They are asking about a drawing, about the poster you made." Mara felt her stomach drop. "What kind of strangers?" "They wear the uniform of the Royal Guard," Bexley said, her eyes wide with worry. "I saw them speaking with Ferris at the tavern. I think they know it happened there." Mara's hands began to tremble slightly, though she tried to keep her voice steady. "It was just a joke. Surely they cannot punish someone for a joke." "You do not know that," Bexley said. "You should hide, at least until they leave." But Mara knew hiding would only delay the inevitable, and worse, it might make her seem guilty of something far more serious than a silly drawing. She decided instead to continue her day as normally as possible, hoping the enforcers would ask their questions and move on without ever connecting her name to the incident. That hope did not last long. By evening, Ferris himself found her near her home, his expression apologetic and worried. "I am sorry," he said. "They asked directly who drew the poster that was pinned in my tavern. I did not want to lie to royal enforcers. I told them it was you." Mara's heart pounded painfully in her chest. What will happen now? Ferris shook his head. "I do not know. They only said they needed to speak with the artist. They did not seem angry, exactly. More curious, if anything." That night, Mara barely slept. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her small home, imagining every possible outcome. Perhaps she would be fined. Perhaps she would be forced to publicly apologize. Perhaps, in the worst case, she would face far harsher consequences for mocking a king, known for his strict rule. She thought about running, about packing a small bag and leaving before the enforcers found her directly. But where would she go? Her whole life was here. Her friends, her small home, her modest livelihood built from years of sketching portraits for the people of her village. Running would mean losing everything she had built. And for what? A joke that had spiraled far beyond her control. By morning, she had decided to face whatever was coming with as much courage as she could muster. She dressed carefully, tied her hair back neatly, and waited near her home, half expecting the enforcers to arrive at any moment. They arrived just past midday. 3 riders dismounted outside her small home, their expressions calm but serious. The tallest of them, a man with sharp eyes and a composed bearing, stepped forward and studied her carefully. "Are you Mara, the artist who works near the market square?" he asked. "I am," she said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I am Riven, serving under the Alpha King's personal guard. We have been sent to find the person responsible for a certain drawing that has been circulating through several territories." Mara swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze directly. "It was meant as a joke, nothing more. I never intended for it to leave the tavern where I first showed it." Riven studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "The drawing has traveled far beyond that tavern. It reached the capital itself, and it reached the eyes of the Alpha King." Mara felt her knees weaken slightly, but she forced herself to remain standing tall. "I understand if there are consequences for what I did. I take full responsibility." To her surprise, Riven's expression softened slightly, something almost like amusement flickering behind his composed exterior. "The Alpha King does not wish to punish you." Mara blinked, certain she had misheard him. "I am sorry?" "He found the drawing amusing," Riven explained. "He has requested that you be brought before him, not for punishment, but because he wishes to meet the person who created it." Mara stood frozen, trying to process this unexpected turn. She had prepared herself for anger, for punishment, for consequences severe enough to change her life forever. She had not prepared herself for this. "He wants to meet me," she repeated slowly. "Those are his exact instructions," Riven confirmed. "You will need to travel with us to the capital. It is a journey of several days." Bexley, who had been watching nervously from a distance, rushed forward at this news. "You cannot simply take her away like this. What guarantee do we have that she will be treated fairly?" Riven turned to Bexley, his expression firm but not unkind. "I understand your concern. I can assure you, the Alpha King has given clear instructions that no harm should come to her. She will be treated with respect throughout this journey, and during her time in the capital." Mara looked at Bexley, seeing the worry etched clearly across her friend's face. She reached out and squeezed Bexley's hand reassuringly, though she felt far from reassured herself. "I will be all right," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "If the king truly wishes only to meet me, then perhaps this will end far better than either of us imagined." Bexley did not look convinced, but she nodded slowly, understanding that Mara had little choice in the matter, regardless of her own worries. Mara gathered a small bag of belongings, including some of her drawing supplies, unsure why she felt compelled to bring them, but unwilling to leave without them regardless. She said quick goodbyes to a few close neighbors who had gathered to watch the strange scene unfold, each of them offering worried words of encouragement. As she mounted the horse provided for her journey, she cast one last look back at her small home, wondering when she might see it again. The village that had been her entire world suddenly felt very small and very far away as she prepared to travel toward a place she had never imagined visiting, to meet a man she had only ever mocked from a safe distance. The journey began in near silence. the enforcers riding ahead and beside her, their expressions professional and guarded. Mara studied them curiously, wondering what kind of man commanded such disciplined loyalty, wondering what she would say when finally standing before him. She thought about the drawing again, replaying every exaggerated feature in her mind, the oversized nose, the crooked crown, the ridiculous glare she had given him. She wondered if he still held that same expression now, or if meeting her in person would reveal a very different kind of man altogether. As the miles passed beneath them, and her village disappeared entirely from view, Mara found herself caught between fear and a strange, unexpected curiosity. Whatever waited for her at the end of this journey, she knew her life was about to change, in ways she could never have predicted when she first put ink to parchment, as nothing more than a harmless joke among friends. The journey to the capital took 4 full days, and with each mile, Mara felt the weight of her ordinary life falling further behind her. She had never traveled this far before, never seen roads so wide or towns so grand as the ones they passed through along the way. Riven and his fellow enforcers remained polite throughout the trip, offering her food and rest whenever needed, though they said little about what awaited her at the palace. On the second night, as they made camp beside a quiet river, Mara finally worked up the courage to ask Riven a question that had been troubling her since they left her village. "Why did he really send you to find me?" she asked, sitting across the small fire from him. Kings do not usually bother themselves with village jokes. Riven considered his answer carefully before speaking. The Alpha King has ruled for many years now. In that time, he has faced constant flattery, constant careful words, constant people telling him only what they believe he wants to hear. Your drawing was different. It held nothing back. It was mockery, Mara pointed out. Surely that is worse than flattery for a king to endure. Perhaps, Riven admitted, but mockery born from honesty can sometimes mean more than praise built on lies. I believe he found something refreshing in seeing himself through eyes that were not afraid to laugh at him. Mara considered this quietly, watching the flames dance before her. I still find it hard to believe he is not planning some punishment disguised as an invitation. Riven's expression remained calm. I have served him for 3 years now. I have seen him angry, and I have seen him calculating in ways that would concern you greatly. This was neither. What I witnessed in that throne room was something closer to genuine amusement, perhaps even relief, at encountering something so unfiltered. His words did little to fully calm her nerves, but they offered some small comfort as the journey continued. By the 3rd day, the landscape began to change dramatically, wide fields giving way to taller buildings and busier roads as they approached the outskirts of the capital. Mara had heard stories about the capital her entire life, tales of grand markets and towering palace walls, but nothing had prepared her for the actual sight of it. The city stretched further than she could see in any direction, filled with more people than she had ever witnessed gathered in one place. Merchants called out from crowded stalls, children ran through narrow alleys, and everywhere she looked, banners bearing the royal crest fluttered from tall buildings. At the center of it all stood the palace itself, a massive structure of pale stone that seemed to touch the clouds above it. Mara found herself staring up at it with a mixture of awe and dread as they approached the main gates. The guards stationed there recognized Riven immediately, allowing their small group through without hesitation. Mara felt countless eyes following her as they passed through the courtyard, curious whispers rising among the palace staff, who had clearly already heard rumors about the artist being summoned by their king. She was led to a small chamber, where she was given time to wash and change into simpler but finer clothing than what she had traveled in. A young servant girl helped braid her hair, chattering nervously about how exciting it was that someone from a small village had captured the Alpha King's attention. "Is he really as fearsome as everyone says?" Mara asked quietly, unable to hold back her curiosity any longer. The servant girl hesitated before answering. "He is strict, and he does not tolerate foolishness in matters of rule. But those of us who work closely within the palace know he is fair, even if he rarely shows warmth." This offered little additional comfort, but Mara appreciated the honesty nonetheless. Once dressed, she was led through long corridors lined with tall windows and elaborate tapestries, depicting past battles and triumphs. Her footsteps echoed softly against the polished floors, each step bringing her closer to a meeting she still could not quite believe was happening. Riven walked beside her, sensing her nervousness. "Remember, he requested this meeting out of curiosity, not anger. Answer honestly, and you will likely find this encounter far less frightening than you expect. They finally reached a set of massive wooden doors, guarded by two stern-faced sentries, who stepped aside upon seeing Riven's approach. The doors opened slowly, revealing a grand throne room bathed in afternoon light, streaming through tall arched windows. And there, seated upon a throne carved from dark polished wood, sat the Alpha King himself. Mara's breath caught in her throat. Even from a distance, she could see that her drawing had captured almost nothing accurate about his true appearance. Where she had exaggerated his features into something comical, the real man before her possessed a striking, commanding presence that no amount of mockery could diminish. His jaw was indeed sharp, but elegantly so. His eyes, dark and intense, studied her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken, for reasons she could not fully explain. He rose slowly from his throne as she approached, his expression unreadable, and Mara found herself suddenly very aware of every step she took across the long room toward him. "So," Cale said, his voice deep and steady, carrying easily across the silent chamber, "you are the artist responsible for turning me into a laughingstock across half my kingdom." Mara felt her cheeks flush, uncertain whether to apologize or defend herself. She settled instead on a small, respectful bow, though she kept her eyes locked with his throughout the gesture. "I never intended for it to spread so far, Your Majesty," she said carefully. "It began as a private joke among friends." "And yet here we are," Cale replied, a hint of something unreadable flickering behind his dark eyes. "Word of your little joke reached every corner of my kingdom before it reached me." Mara straightened her shoulders, deciding that groveling would serve her poorly if this man truly wished for honesty rather than flattery. "If it offended you, I offer my sincere apology, though I confess, I do not entirely regret making people laugh." A long silence followed her words, tense enough that Mara feared she had spoken too boldly. But then, slowly, the corner of Cale's mouth lifted into something that resembled genuine amusement. "At least you are honest about your lack of regret," he said. "That alone sets you apart from nearly everyone else who stands before this throne." Mara felt a strange mixture of relief and confusion at his response. She had expected anger, punishment, perhaps even banishment for her actions. Instead, she found herself standing before a king who seemed almost pleased by her defiance. "May I ask, Your Majesty," she said carefully, "why you summoned me here yourself, rather than simply having your guards handle the matter?" Cale studied her for a long moment before answering, his expression thoughtful. "Because I wished to see for myself what kind of person creates something so bold, without fear of consequence. And because, admittedly, I found myself curious about the artist skilled enough to capture something true about me, even while distorting every feature into mockery." Mara did not know how to respond to such an admission, so she remained silent, watching him carefully as he stepped down from his throne and approached her directly. "You will remain here in the palace for the time being," he said, his tone shifting into something more decisive. "I have a proposition for you, one I believe you may find far more interesting than any punishment I could devise." Mara's heart pounded as she waited to hear what exactly the Alpha King had in mind for her, uncertain whether this new turn of events would prove better or far more complicated than anything she could have imagined when she first drew that ridiculous poster back in her quiet little village. Cale circled her slowly, studying her with the same careful attention he might give a puzzle he intended to solve. Mara stood still, refusing to let her nervousness show, though her heart continued to hammer against her ribs. "You have real skill," he said finally, stopping in front of her again. "Even in mockery, your lines were confident, your proportions deliberate despite their exaggeration. That is not something easily taught." "I have been drawing since I was a child," Mara admitted. "It became my trade once I grew old enough to earn coin from it." "And yet you chose to spend that skill mocking your own king," Cale said, though his tone carried more curiosity than accusation now. "I chose to spend it making my friends laugh," Mara corrected gently. "You simply happened to be the subject that night." Cale's lips curved again, that same faint amusement returning to his expression. "Bold words, spoken directly to the man you mocked." "You said yourself you find honesty refreshing," Mara replied, surprising even herself with her own boldness. "I merely took you at your word." For a long moment, Cale studied her in silence, something shifting behind his dark eyes that Mara could not quite interpret. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a genuine sound that echoed through the throne room and drew startled glances from the guards and advisors still present. "I like you," he said simply, once his laughter subsided. "Most who stand before me choose their words with such careful caution that I can barely tell what they truly think. You, apparently, cannot help yourself." Mara felt heat rise to her cheeks, uncertain whether his words were meant as compliment or warning. "I apologize if my honesty proves inconvenient, Your Majesty." "On the contrary," Kale said, "I find it exactly the opposite of inconvenient." He turned toward one of his advisors standing nearby. "Prepare quarters for our guest. She will remain here in the palace as my official portrait artist for the time being." The advisor's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise, though he bowed without question. "As you wish, Your Majesty." Mara blinked in confusion. "Your official portrait artist?" "The portrait currently displayed in my private study was completed years ago and no longer accurately represents me," Kale explained, though something in his tone suggested this reasoning might not be entirely genuine. "Since you clearly possess talent, however misapplied recently, I see no reason not to put it toward proper use." Mara studied him carefully, sensing there was more to this arrangement than he was admitting. "And how long will this position require me to remain here?" "As long as necessary," Kale replied simply, offering no further explanation. "You will be given proper quarters, fair compensation, and access to whatever supplies you require for your work." Mara hesitated, considering her options. She had little choice but to accept, given the circumstances of her arrival, though the arrangement itself seemed far kinder than anything she had expected when Riven first found her back in her village. "I accept," she said finally, "though I hope you understand that painting an accurate portrait of you may prove more difficult than mocking one." Kale's eyes glinted with amusement. "Why is that?" "Because capturing exaggeration requires only imagination," Mara said. "Capturing truth requires actually understanding your subject, which I suspect you rarely allow anyone to do." Something flickered across Kale's expression at her words, a brief crack in his composed exterior, before he schooled his features back into calm authority. "Then I suppose you will simply have to spend enough time in my presence to understand me properly." The way he said it, quiet and deliberate, sent an unexpected shiver through Mara that she chose not to examine too closely. She was led away shortly after by a palace servant, given a small but comfortable chamber near the eastern wing, along with a promise that proper drawing supplies would be provided by morning. Alone in her new quarters that evening, Mara sat by the window, staring out at the vast city stretching below the palace walls. Her mind raced with everything that had happened since Riven first arrived at her village. She had expected punishment, perhaps even worse, and instead found herself housed within the very palace of the king she had mocked, tasked with capturing his likeness properly, for reasons she suspected went beyond simple vanity about an outdated portrait. She thought about his laughter, genuine and unexpected, so different from the cold, unreadable ruler everyone in her village had always described. She thought about the way his expression had shifted when she spoke boldly, something like relief flickering behind his guarded eyes, as though her honesty offered him something he rarely received from anyone else. The following morning, Mara was escorted to Kale's private study, where a servant had already arranged a small easel, fresh parchment, and a selection of inks and charcoal for her use. Kale arrived shortly after, dressed simply compared to his formal attire from the previous day, though he carried himself with the same commanding presence regardless. "Shall we begin?" he asked, settling into a chair positioned near the window where natural light illuminated his features clearly. Mara studied him carefully, taking in every detail she had exaggerated so foolishly in her previous drawing. Up close, his jaw was indeed sharp, but balanced by eyes that held far more depth and weariness than she had ever imagined a king's eyes might carry. There were faint lines near his temples, evidence of stress carried for years beneath his composed exterior. "You seem tired," she observed quietly, beginning her first careful strokes upon the parchment. Kale's gaze flickered toward her, mild surprise crossing his features. "That is a rather personal observation for someone tasked with painting a formal portrait." "You wanted honesty," Mara reminded him, continuing her work without pause. "I am simply providing it." A quiet chuckle escaped him. "So it seems I have traded mockery for blunt honesty. I am uncertain which proves more challenging to endure." "Perhaps both, equally," Mara said, allowing herself a small smile as she continued sketching the true lines of his face. Lines far more complicated and human than anything she had imagined when drawing her ridiculous poster back home. As the session continued, quiet conversation began flowing between them, tentative at first, then gradually more comfortable. Cale spoke little of politics or rule, instead answering Mara's careful questions about his childhood, his early years, before ascending to the throne, small fragments of a life she suspected he rarely shared with anyone. By the time the session ended, Mara realized with some surprise that she had spent hours in his presence, without once feeling the fear she had expected upon first arriving at the palace. Instead, she found herself curious, intrigued by the layers hidden beneath the cold exterior. Everyone outside these walls believed to find him entirely. She had come to the palace expecting punishment for a simple prank. Instead, she found herself slowly uncovering the true man behind the crown, one careful stroke of charcoal at a time, uncertain where this strange and unexpected arrangement might eventually lead her. Days turned into weeks, and Mara found her life settling into an unexpected rhythm within the palace walls. Each morning, she would rise early, sketch preliminary studies of light and shadow near her window, then make her way to Cale's private study, where their sessions had become a regular part of both their days. The palace staff had grown accustomed to her presence, though whispers still followed her through the corridors. Some viewed her with curiosity, wondering what made a simple village artist worthy of the king's personal attention. Others regarded her with quiet suspicion, uncertain what her true intentions might be. Mara paid little attention to the whispers, focusing instead on her work and on the strange, evolving relationship forming between herself and the man she had once mocked so carelessly. Their sessions had grown longer over time, conversation flowing more easily between careful strokes of charcoal and ink. "You held your temper remarkably well during today's council meeting," Mara observed one afternoon, glancing up from her work to study Cale's expression. She had begun attending certain public sessions at his request, capturing quick sketches of him in different settings to better understand his full range of expressions. "You noticed my restraint?" Cale asked, arching an eyebrow. "I noticed the way your jaw tightened every time Lord Ashwin spoke," Mara said, continuing her sketching. "You clearly disagreed with nearly everything he suggested." Cale chuckled softly. "Lord Ashwin believes doubling border taxes will somehow win the loyalty of territories already struggling under current burdens. His reasoning defies basic logic, yet he insists on repeating it every council session." "Then why not simply overrule him?" Mara asked curiously. "Because ruling requires patience with fools, as much as it requires decisiveness against threats," Cale replied, his tone growing more serious. "If I dismissed every foolish suggestion without consideration, I would soon find myself surrounded only by those too afraid to speak at all." Mara paused her work, studying him thoughtfully. "That sounds exhausting." "It often is," Cale admitted, something rare and vulnerable flickering across his usually composed features. "Ruling is rarely as simple as commanding obedience. It requires constant balance between authority and patience, between decisiveness and diplomacy." These small admissions had become more frequent as their time together continued, each one revealing another layer of the man hidden beneath his royal title. Mara found herself genuinely fascinated by these glimpses, far more interested in understanding the real Cale Thorne than she had ever expected when first arriving at the palace under such uncertain circumstances. Their conversations extended beyond the formal sessions too. Cale began seeking her out during quieter moments throughout the palace, whether during evening walks through the private gardens, or over shared meals when his schedule allowed such luxury. Mara found herself looking forward to these moments more than she cared to admit, even to herself. "Tell me something," Cale said one evening as they walked slowly through the palace gardens, the sky painted in brilliant shades of orange and pink above them. "Did you ever imagine, when drawing that ridiculous poster, that it would lead to something like this?" Mara laughed softly, shaking her head. "I imagined, at most, that my friends would laugh and then forget about it entirely by morning. I certainly never imagined it reaching your throne room, let alone leading to weeks spent living within your palace." "Do you regret it?" Cale asked, his tone carrying genuine curiosity rather than accusation. Mara considered the question seriously before answering. "No," she said finally. "Strange as it sounds, I do not regret any part of it. Not the drawing, not the journey here, and certainly not the time I have spent getting to know you since arriving." Cale stopped walking, turning to face her directly, something intense and unreadable flickering behind his dark eyes. I find myself feeling similarly, he admitted quietly. Though I confess, this entire situation has proven far more complicated than I anticipated when I first ordered Riven to find you. Complicated how? Mara asked, her heart quickening slightly at his tone. Cale hesitated, clearly weighing his words carefully before speaking. I did not expect to find myself looking forward to our sessions the way I have. I did not expect conversations with a village artist to become the most honest exchanges I experience within these palace walls. Mara felt warmth spreading through her chest at his admission, though she tried to keep her own expression composed, despite the sudden rush of emotion his words had stirred within her. Perhaps that says more about the honesty missing from your usual surroundings than it does about me specifically, she offered gently. Perhaps, Cale agreed, though something in his gaze suggested he believed otherwise. Regardless, I find myself grateful for whatever unlikely chain of events led you here, mockery and all. They continued their walk in comfortable silence after that, the weight of unspoken feelings settling gently between them without demanding immediate resolution. Mara found herself smiling as they walked, marveling at how completely her life had transformed since that ordinary evening back in her small village tavern. Over the following days, their bond continued deepening steadily. Mara learned about Cale's difficult childhood, about the responsibilities thrust upon him, far earlier than any young man should have been forced to bear them. Cale, in turn, learned about Mara's own history, about the family she had lost young, about the resilience that had shaped her into the bold, unfiltered woman who now occupied so much of his thoughts. Riven, observing these developments quietly from his position within the palace guard, found himself both amused and slightly concerned by the changes he witnessed in his king. Cale smiled more often now, laughed more freely, seemed lighter somehow despite the constant weight of his responsibilities. Yet Riven also understood the political complications such a bond might eventually create. Understood that not everyone within the palace would welcome an outsider capturing so much of their king's genuine attention and affection. For now, however, such concerns remained distant possibilities rather than immediate threats. Mara continued her work on the official portrait, though both she and Cale understood by this point that the true purpose of her continued presence extended far beyond any painting hanging upon a study wall. Something real was growing between them, undeniable despite its unlikely origins, and neither seemed inclined to resist wherever this unexpected connection might eventually lead them. One evening, as autumn settled over the capital and the palace gardens turned shades of amber and gold, Mara found Cale sitting alone on a stone bench overlooking the fountain, his expression heavier than she had seen in weeks. She approached quietly, settling beside him without immediately speaking, sensing that whatever weighed on him required patience rather than questions. The northern territories are growing restless, he finally said, staring at the water cascading gently before them. Reports suggest another pack leader is gathering support, questioning my authority, spreading doubt among those still loyal to my rule. Is this common? Mara asked carefully. More common than I would like, Cale admitted. Power invites challenge. There will always be those who believe they could rule better, who see any perceived weakness as opportunity. Mara studied his profile carefully, noticing the exhaustion etched clearly into his features, despite his attempt at composure. Do you ever grow tired of constantly defending what is rightfully yours? Cale let out a long breath, every single day, but tiredness is a luxury I cannot afford to show. The moment my enemies sense hesitation, they will strike without mercy. You do not have to hide that exhaustion from me, Mara said gently, reaching over to place her hand lightly atop his. Cale turned to look at her, something vulnerable flickering behind his usually guarded eyes. You are the only person within these walls I feel comfortable showing such weakness to. It is not weakness, Mara corrected softly. It is simply being human, something I suspect you rarely allow yourself to be. They sat together in silence for a long while after that, the weight of unspoken understanding settling comfortably between them. Mara found herself leaning slightly closer, and Cale did not pull away, both of them acknowledging silently the growing bond neither had expected nor fully understood when this entire strange arrangement began. Over the following weeks, their closeness continued deepening despite the mounting political pressures surrounding Cale's rule. Reports of unrest in the north grew more frequent, forcing Cale into longer council sessions and more frequent absences from their usual painting sessions. Mara noticed the toll this pressure took on him, the tightness returning to his shoulders, the shorter, more clipped responses during their rare moments together. She worried for him, though she understood there was little she could offer, beyond quiet support and honest companionship during whatever brief moments they managed to share. "You look troubled again," she observed one evening, finding him staring blankly at a map spread across his study table, various territories marked with small pins, indicating troop movements and reported unrest. "Lord Draven grows bolder," Cale said grimly, not looking up from the map. "He has begun openly questioning my fitness to rule, suggesting that a king, distracted by personal matters, cannot properly protect his kingdom." Mara felt a cold chill settle over her at his words. Personal matters? Does he mean me? Cale's silence answered her question clearly enough. "Rumors have spread regarding your continued presence here. Some believe you hold undue influence over my decisions. Others suggest far worse motivations behind your arrival." "What kind of worse motivations?" Mara asked, her voice tightening with concern. "Some believe you were sent deliberately, perhaps even trained specifically, to distract and manipulate me for the benefit of rival territories," Cale admitted reluctantly. "Draven has used these rumors to further undermine confidence in my judgment." Mara felt anger flare within her at such baseless accusations. "That is absurd. I drew a foolish poster as a joke among friends. I never sought any of this." "I know that," Cale said firmly, finally looking up to meet her gaze directly. "But perception often matters more than truth, in matters of political power. Draven does not need his accusations to be accurate. He only needs them to create enough doubt to weaken my position among those still uncertain of their loyalty." Mara felt the weight of this new reality settling heavily upon her shoulders. She had never intended to become a political liability, never imagined that her simple presence within the palace could be twisted into ammunition against the very man she had grown to care for so deeply. "Perhaps I should leave," she suggested quietly, though the words felt painful even as she spoke them. "If my presence here threatens your rule, perhaps it would be better for everyone if I returned home." Cale's expression hardened immediately, something fierce and protective flashing behind his dark eyes. "I will not allow rumors and political maneuvering to dictate who remains within my own palace. But if it threatens your throne—" "My throne has faced greater threats than idle rumors before," Cale interrupted firmly. "I did not survive years of political maneuvering and constant challenges to my authority by allowing fear to dictate my choices now." Mara studied him carefully, seeing the fierce determination etched clearly across his features. "And if Draven continues pressing this matter further, then he will learn quickly that threatening you carries far greater consequences than he currently understands," Cale said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge Mara had rarely heard from him before. Despite the underlying tension of their conversation, Mara felt a strange warmth spreading through her chest at his fierce protectiveness. Whatever this connection between them truly was, it had clearly grown into something far too significant for either of them to simply walk away from now, regardless of the political complications threatening to surround them. Yet even as Cale reassured her of his protection, Mara could not shake the growing unease settling deep within her. She understood now that their bond, however genuine and meaningful it had become, existed within a world of political danger, far beyond anything she had ever experienced in her simple village life. Lord Draven's accusations, however baseless, carried real weight within the complicated politics of Cale's rule. And as their closeness continued deepening, Mara feared that this danger would only grow more serious, threatening not just Cale's throne, but perhaps her own safety as well, should Draven decide that rumors alone were insufficient to achieve his ambitious goals. Lord Draven arrived at the palace 3 days later, requesting an audience under the pretense of discussing border security in the Northern Territories. Mara learned of his arrival through Riven, who found her in the garden and warned her carefully to remain cautious during the coming days. "Draven is cunning," Riven explained, his expression serious. "He will not openly challenge Cale's authority without careful preparation. Whatever he intends, he has likely planned it thoroughly before ever setting foot within these walls." "What should I do?" Mara asked, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "Remain visible but cautious," Riven advised. "Do not give him reason to believe you fear him, but do not provide opportunity for him to use you against Cale either." Mara nodded, though uncertainty still churned within her as she prepared herself for whatever confrontation might arise during Draven's visit. She continued her usual routine as best she could, though she remained acutely aware of unfamiliar eyes following her movements throughout the palace corridors. She encountered Lord Draven directly 2 days into his stay, crossing paths with him unexpectedly in one of the palace's quieter hallways. He was a tall man with sharp features and calculating eyes that studied her with obvious curiosity as she approached. "Ah," he said, stopping directly in her path, forcing her to halt as well. "You must be the artist, causing quite a stir throughout the kingdom." "I am simply here fulfilling a commission," Mara replied evenly, refusing to let her nervousness show. "A commission," Draven repeated, his tone carrying obvious skepticism. "Curious how a simple portrait commission has kept you within these walls for so many weeks now." "The Alpha King requires patience for accurate work," Mara said, holding his gaze steadily, despite her racing pulse. "I imagine you understand the importance of getting important matters right, rather than rushing them." Draven's lips curved into something resembling a smile, though it held no genuine warmth. "Clever answer. I can see why our king finds your company so distracting." Before Mara could respond, Draven continued walking past her, though his final words lingered ominously in the air behind him. "Do be careful, artist. Palace politics can prove far more dangerous than village life ever was." Mara stood frozen for a long moment after he passed, his thinly veiled threat settling uncomfortably within her chest. She hurried to find Kael immediately, needing to share this unsettling encounter before Draven's intentions grew any clearer. She found Kael in his private study, reviewing reports with a deep frown etched across his features. He looked up immediately upon her entrance, concern flashing across his face at her obviously troubled expression. "What happened?" he asked, rising quickly from his desk. Mara recounted her brief but unsettling encounter with Draven, watching as Kael's expression grew increasingly dark with each word she spoke. "He threatened you directly?" Kael asked, his voice carrying barely restrained anger. "Not directly," Mara clarified, but his meaning was clear enough. Kael's jaw tightened visibly, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "I will not allow him to threaten you within my own palace." "Kael," Mara said carefully, using his given name rather than his title for the first time. "Confronting him directly may only give him exactly the excuse he needs to further undermine your authority. Perhaps it would be wiser to remain cautious rather than reactive." Kael studied her for a long moment, something softening slightly in his expression at her use of his name. "You are right, of course, but I will not simply allow him to threaten someone I care for without consequence either." The admission hung between them, unspoken feelings finally acknowledged directly rather than through careful implication. Mara felt her heart swell at his words, though the danger surrounding them remained very real and pressing despite this tender moment. Over the following days, Draven continued his calculated maneuvering, spreading careful rumors among visiting nobles and palace staff alike, suggesting that Kael's judgment had grown compromised by personal attachment, questioning whether a king so easily distracted could truly protect his kingdom's interests against growing threats from neighboring territories. Kael, for his part, remained publicly composed, refusing to give Draven the satisfaction of visible distress. Yet Mara noticed the toll this constant pressure took on him privately, the sleepless nights, the growing tension in his shoulders whenever Draven's name arose in conversation. Matters came to a head during a formal council session, where Draven finally made his challenge explicit, standing before the assembled nobles and openly questioning Kael's fitness to rule, given his apparent distraction with matters unrelated to the kingdom's welfare. "Perhaps," Draven suggested loudly, his voice carrying deliberately throughout the council chamber, "our king requires reminding of where his true priorities should lie. A ruler distracted by personal affairs cannot properly defend his territories against those who would seek to exploit such weakness." Silence fell across the chamber as every eye turned toward Kael, waiting to see how he would respond to such a direct and public challenge to his authority. Mara, standing quietly at the edge of the room where she had been permitted to observe, felt her heart pounding painfully as she waited alongside everyone else. Kael rose slowly from his throne, his expression calm despite the obvious tension simmering beneath his composed exterior. When he finally spoke, his voice carried clearly and steadily across the silent chamber, leaving no room for doubt or misunderstanding. "Lord Draven questions my judgment," he said evenly, yet offers no evidence beyond baseless rumor and calculated insinuation. "If he wishes to challenge my rule directly, I suggest he do so with facts, rather than veiled accusations, designed merely to sow doubt among those too foolish to recognize manipulation when they witness it. Draven's expression flickered with barely concealed anger at being called out so directly before the assembled council. I merely raise legitimate concerns, shared by many within these territories, Your Majesty. Then name those concerns directly, Kael challenged, his voice growing firmer. Or admit that your true intention here is simply to weaken my position for your own ambitious gain. The chamber fell into tense silence, every noble present holding their breath as they watched this dangerous confrontation unfold before them, uncertain how far Draven might be willing to push his challenge, or how decisively Kael might respond should that challenge escalate beyond mere words. Draven's eyes narrowed as he studied Kael carefully, clearly recalculating his approach in light of the king's unexpectedly firm response. The assembled nobles watched with rapt attention, sensing that whatever happened next would determine the balance of power within the council for months, perhaps years, to come. Very well, Draven said finally, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. If your majesty insists on directness, allow me to speak plainly. The artist you have kept within these walls poses a genuine risk to this kingdom's stability. Her continued presence distracts you from proper governance and provides ammunition for those who question whether personal attachment has compromised your judgment. And what evidence do you offer that her presence has compromised anything? Kael asked evenly. Perception itself is evidence enough among those who matter, Draven replied. Several allied territories have already expressed concern regarding rumors of your personal involvement with a common village artist. Such involvement raises questions about appropriate judgment for a ruler of your position. Mara felt her stomach clench painfully at hearing herself discussed so openly, so coldly, as though she were merely a political liability, rather than a person with genuine feelings caught in the middle of this dangerous confrontation. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but understood that interrupting now might only worsen matters further. Kael's expression darkened considerably at Draven's words. You would have me abandon someone based purely on shallow rumors, spread by those seeking to exploit any perceived weakness for their own advantage? I would have you consider the stability of your kingdom above personal desires, Draven countered smoothly. Surely, you understand the difference between a ruler's private feelings and the responsibilities demanded by his position. The chamber remained tensely silent as Kael considered his response carefully. Mara watched him, her heart aching at the impossible position Draven had maneuvered him into, forcing a choice between his growing feelings for her and the stability of the kingdom he had sworn to protect. Finally, Kael spoke, his voice carrying absolute conviction that silenced any remaining doubt among those watching. You mistake weakness for strength, Draven. A ruler who abandons those he cares for, simply to appease baseless rumors, demonstrates far greater weakness than one who stands firmly by his choices, despite political pressure. He stepped down from his throne, moving deliberately toward where Mara stood at the edge of the chamber, extending his hand toward her in full view of the assembled council. Mara hesitated only a moment before stepping forward and taking his offered hand, feeling every eye in the room settle upon them both. This woman, Kael announced, his voice carrying clearly throughout the silent chamber, arrived in this palace under unusual circumstances, yes. But in the time since, she has shown me more honesty, more genuine courage than nearly anyone else within these walls. If standing beside her constitutes weakness in the eyes of those seeking to undermine my authority, then I gladly accept that perceived weakness. Draven's expression twisted with barely controlled fury at this unexpected declaration. You would risk the stability of your entire kingdom for personal sentiment? I would risk nothing that true strength cannot withstand, Kael replied firmly. If allied territories choose to question my fitness to rule, based purely on manufactured rumor, rather than actual governance, then those territories were never truly loyal to begin with. I will not be manipulated by fear disguised as political concern. The chamber remained silent for a long, tense moment before murmurs began rippling through the assembled nobles, some clearly impressed by Kael's unwavering conviction, others exchanging uncertain glances as they reconsidered their previous doubts. Draven, sensing the shifting mood within the chamber, attempted one final desperate maneuver. Perhaps a formal vote among the council would better determine whether such personal attachments should influence matters of state. There will be no vote, Kael said firmly, his tone leaving absolutely no room for further argument. This is not a democracy, Draven. I rule this kingdom, and I will not have my personal choices subjected to votes designed merely to satisfy your own ambitious desires for greater influence. Draven's composure finally cracked slightly under the weight of his obvious defeat. This is a mistake, Your Majesty. Mark my words, this decision will haunt your rule. Perhaps, Kael acknowledged calmly, but it will be my mistake to make, guided by my own judgment rather than manipulation disguised as counsel. With that, Kael turned and led Mara from the chamber, leaving Draven standing amid the murmuring nobles, his carefully constructed challenge having crumbled entirely in the face of Kael's unwavering resolve. Once they had retreated to the privacy of Kael's study, Mara finally allowed herself to release the breath she had been holding throughout the entire confrontation. You risked everything for me back there. I risked nothing I was not already prepared to risk, Kael replied gently, turning to face her directly. I have spent years ruling through careful calculation and constant vigilance against threats to my authority, but somewhere during these past weeks, I realized that some things matter more than simply maintaining appearances of strength. Mara felt tears gathering unexpectedly in her eyes at his words. I never intended to become a source of political danger for you. You are not danger, Kael said firmly, reaching up to gently brush away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. You are the first genuinely honest thing that has entered my life in longer than I care to admit. Draven's threats only confirmed how much I have come to value that honesty. Mara looked up at him, seeing none of the guarded, distant king everyone in her village had once described, seeing instead simply a man who had chosen her, publicly and without hesitation, despite the very real political risks such a choice carried. What happens now? She asked softly. Now, Kael said, his expression softening into something warmer than she had ever seen from him before. We continue exactly as we have been, except without the burden of hidden feelings or unspoken concerns holding us back any longer. For the first time since arriving at the palace under such uncertain and frightening circumstances, Mara felt genuine hope blooming within her chest. Hope that whatever challenges still lay ahead, she would face them alongside a man who had proven, beyond any doubt, that his feelings for her were as genuine and unwavering as her own had quietly become for him. In the weeks following the confrontation with Draven, life within the palace settled into a new and steadier rhythm. Word of Kael's public declaration spread quickly throughout the capital and beyond, and while some nobles remained skeptical, many others found themselves surprisingly moved by their king's unwavering honesty regarding his feelings. Draven, having lost significant standing following his failed maneuver, retreated quietly to his own territories, his influence within the council considerably diminished. Riven informed Mara privately that several nobles who had previously wavered toward Draven's side had since reaffirmed their loyalty to Kael, impressed by the strength and conviction he had shown, rather than viewing his choice as the weakness Draven had hoped to expose. Mara continued her work on Kael's official portrait, though their sessions together had transformed entirely, from the cautious, formal exchanges of their earliest days, into something far warmer and more comfortable. She found herself laughing freely during their time together now, teasing him about his tendency toward overly serious expressions, delighting in the genuine smiles she could coax from him with increasing ease. You are still terrible at holding still, she informed him one afternoon, adjusting her easel slightly as he shifted again in his seat by the window. I am a king, not a statue, Kael replied, though his tone carried obvious affection rather than genuine complaint. Perhaps you should simply draw me the way you did originally. At least that version did not require me sitting motionless for hours at a time. Mara laughed, shaking her head. I believe we both agreed that particular portrait was rather unflattering. On the contrary, Kael said, rising from his seat and crossing toward her with quiet purpose. I have grown rather fond of that first drawing. It brought you into my life, after all. He reached her side and gently took her hand, guiding her attention away from her work toward him instead. Which is precisely why I intend to keep it displayed here in my study, alongside whatever proper portrait you eventually complete. Mara's eyebrows rose in surprise. You want to display the mocking poster I drew of you? Publicly? Not publicly, Kael clarified, a warm smile spreading across his features. Privately, here within my own study, as a reminder of exactly how we found each other. I find something rather fitting about keeping it close, given everything that has unfolded since. Mara felt warmth spreading through her chest at his words, touched by the sentiment behind such an unusual request. Very well, though I insist on completing an accurate portrait regardless. Consider it a proper record of the man you truly are, rather than the exaggerated caricature I once drew so carelessly. Over the following days, Mara poured herself fully into completing the portrait, capturing not the cold, distant ruler everyone outside the palace still imagined, but the true Chaol she had come to know intimately during these past months. She captured the subtle warmth hidden behind his composed exterior, the quiet strength tempered by genuine care for those he had chosen to protect, the weariness of leadership balanced against unwavering conviction. When she finally completed the portrait, she presented it to him privately within his study, watching nervously as he studied the finished work carefully. "This is remarkable," Chaol said softly, studying the careful detail she had captured. "You have painted something far more honest than any portrait I have commissioned before." "I painted the man I have come to know," Mara said simply. "Not the king everyone fears from a distance, but the person you truly are, beneath that crown." Chaol turned from the portrait to look directly at her, his expression carrying an intensity that made her breath catch slightly. "Mara, these past months have changed everything about how I view my own life, my own rule. I never expected a foolish drawing to lead me toward something so genuinely meaningful." "Nor did I," Mara admitted, smiling softly. "I only ever intended to make my friends laugh that evening. I never imagined it would lead me here, to you." "Perhaps," Chaol said, reaching for her hand once more. "Some things are simply meant to unfold exactly as they do, regardless of how unlikely or unexpected their beginnings might seem." Word soon spread throughout the kingdom regarding the growing bond between their king and the village artist, who had once mocked him so boldly. Rather than the scandal Draven had hoped to create, the story instead became something the common people embraced warmly, a tale of honesty triumphing over careful political maneuvering, of genuine connection forming from the most unlikely circumstances imaginable. Mara's own village celebrated the news joyfully once word reached them, Bexley writing excited letters, detailing how proud everyone felt, knowing their own Mara had captured the heart of the Alpha King himself, transforming from a simple village artist into someone whose story would likely be retold for generations to come. As for the original poster, exaggerated features and all, it remained exactly where Chaol had promised, displayed proudly within his private study, alongside the accurate portrait Mara had eventually completed. Visitors who noticed the strange pairing often asked about its significance, and Chaol never hesitated to explain, usually with a warm smile that surprised anyone who still believed the old rumors about his coldness and detachment. The joke that had begun as nothing more than an evening's harmless entertainment among friends had transformed entirely into the origin story of a genuine and lasting love, proving that sometimes the most unexpected beginnings lead toward the most meaningful and enduring connections, exactly as fate, however strangely, had intended all along.